lot better.
Yeah.
That's a talent.
Thank you.
All right.
Nick, Sam,
Hello, good morning.
how are you?
I'm
Wow.
fantastic.
Yeah,
What's new with you?
I like your
Beautiful
hat,
day,
Texas.
good to be alive, hopefully no.
It's pretty it's a pretty appropriate hat for the press conference, you know that?
We were in Chicago yesterday. and I was
You
about to
do
say-
that? Is that what you do? You wear a hat for whatever the subject we're gonna talk about is?
No, I just like to pick a specific team, but today fate just had a funny way of starting our day.
That's funny. That's great. Yeah, you see, this is in Texas, so. I'll put this down here. All right, the camera's on. You know, no Rick Albin. He wasn't here yesterday either, so I don't know. There must be a bigger story somewhere. You know what I mean?
All part of it.
I don't know.
Got Channel 3.
All right, well, good. Well, welcome. Everyone's ready? Welcome. We're back in my office. And we just wanted to update everybody on really what I think the most pressing issue is across our country right now. You know, some people have referred to it as the Biden border bloodbath, but you know, this is a major crisis in our country, which is this influx of illegal aliens coming across the border, really starting in, I mean, it's really surged starting in 2021. And it's interesting because this has become an issue because of lack of enforcement by the federal government. It's really become a more of a state issue. So I've done interviews and things, and people say to me, they say, well, this is a federal issue, okay? Well, when the federal government refuses to enforce our immigration laws and defend our border, then it becomes a state issue, right? And so, you know, you've heard in the news, the state of Texas has taken it upon itself to start defending its border. And it's passed a number of other policies to try to enforce border security in the state. You know, it's interesting, they spend $2 billion a year out of their state budget for border security. And what you're seeing is a number of other states stepping up and aiding their efforts. And we'll talk more about that in a little bit. Sending their National Guards down there. You know, we looked at this, and we went down there to see what was going on, to understand what the role the states have in defending our borders in an environment where the President, Joe Biden, and the federal government is not doing its job. And so it's interesting, you know, we've counted 11 other states that are putting their National Guards on the border and supporting Texas, many of which, you know, were there with us. You know, we went down there with other state delegations, state leaders from across the country, many of which had National Guard units down there on the border to observe what was going on, to understand the threat, and to see what states can do. So just to give you an example, I mean, Arkansas, Florida, Indiana, Iowa, Louisiana, Missouri, Montana, Nebraska, New Hampshire, Tennessee, and South Dakota are all states that have National or State Guard units, or both, down there helping Texas. So we went down there to look at that and see what the role of the states is. I'll get more into it, but is there anything you wanna say? I don't want to take everything.
Well, thanks, Leader Hall, appreciate it, thanks for coming out. I mean, immigration has come to be the number one issue I think in the United States and the policy discussion that's going on today. And what's happened is what we learned from this trip hosted by the Texas Department of Public Safety and helped by Senator Phil King, who's a state senator down in Texas, brought in a group of legislative leaders to talk about what they're seeing on the border, what's been the challenge that they've had on the border, and we came away, it was an eye-opening experience. What the Biden administration has done on the border is appalling. It's wrong. what we've seen over the last 3 years and what we had briefings from the Texas Department of Public Safety and the National Guard and the Texas Guard on the ground is that the policies that they changed have just created an open border policy. You've had, from the statistics, you've had 3.9 million illegal alien apprehensions over the last 3 years. That's just the ones that have been caught. They process them and then they have these defensive asylum claims. They cross illegally, and then they just release them back into the United States, into the interior, fly them into places like Denver and Chicago and New York City. And it's been a real challenge on the resources. So you have people, you have drugs, fentanyl, methamphetamine, and you have human trafficking going north, and you have money going south. And what we learned on the whole borders is that the states along the border, the Mexican states along the border, it's the Mexican cartel that really controls it all. And that folks over the last 3 years have decided that this is the time to come across the border because of the policies that the Biden administration has enacted. And what does that mean? I mean, just in the last years, what were shared, it's called Operation Lone Star, is what the Texas Department of Public Safety, Leader Hall mentioned that Texas is spending over $2 billion a year on border security. And where we went in Eagle Pass, Palmer Park is where they were seeing thousands and thousands coming across daily back in December. In a town of a little over 25,000, that you're talking over 3,500 illegal aliens coming across. And what Border Patrol was doing was just processing them. They get the asylum claim, and then they send them into the interior of the country. And just couldn't handle it anymore. And so what Texas did is started to work on building some border security measures. And where we saw where the state has taken the charge is that they were building barriers along the border. That's where a lot of the National Guardsmen from other states, along with Texas, were coming in to help with that border security. And what does the federal government do? They sue the state of Texas for trying to improve the health and safety of their residents in Texas. And from what we've seen from Operation Lone Star, which is directed by the state of Texas, is that they've moved from where 70% of the illegal aliens were coming across into Texas, now 70% are coming across into other states. So working on creating the barriers, working to prevent these illegal crossings has been effective. Now, what are the other states in New Mexico, Arizona, and California going to do to respond? But just some of the statistics that they shared with us, it really comes down as like over the last 3 years, 3.9 million illegal alien apprehensions. You're talking nearly 10,000 from China, 250,000 from El Salvador, 500,000 from Venezuela, getting folks from all over the world. They know coming in through JFK or LAX or O'Hare, they wouldn't be allowed in because of their immigration status, but the open border policies are affecting us here at home here in Michigan. We're having conversations a few weeks ago when we were at the Roundtable with President Trump when he was in Grand Rapids. We had a bunch of sheriffs. My sheriff, Abbott, mentioned that the only thing we've seen that's gone down in price over the last 3 years is fentanyl and methamphetamine. 70% price increase. You don't see meth house buses anymore in Michigan because it's so much cheaper to import it from Mexico than to produce it in the United States. That's how much is on the street. And in Van Buren County, small county, we're dealing with up to 2 deaths a week on overdoses. And what you see with the fentanyl coming across, and we got this explained to us at the border, is that there's no consistency in what's in the pills. They've captured 500 million, 500 million lethal fentanyl pills as part of Operation Lone Star in Texas. And but there's no, some are lethal, heavy overdoses, some have zero amount of fentanyl in them because there's no consistency on it, and people are dying because of this. And it's something that we need to step up. That's why House and Senate Republicans have introduced legislation to stop the magnet of sanctuary jurisdictions here in Michigan. While we've been battling things like what the Whitmer administration has issued and saying they want to pay for legal services for illegal aliens that have come across, help pay for housing stipends for these folks. And you see what's happened in West Michigan near our place, where we've had an illegal immigrant who was kicked out under Trump's ICE and came back in, afterwards, killed a young lady. A young lady's dead now. 2 of them actually over the last year in West Michigan, the hands of illegal aliens. And we've seen sex predators in Sturgis that are illegal aliens. You've seen, I think the Detroit News you saw covering what they term is crime tourists. I've never heard that term before, but something where you have gangs, roaming gangs that are breaking into homes in Metro Detroit. This needs to stop. It's something where we need to step up and show that stop being an attraction point of some of the policies that Governor Whitmer has introduced, and some of these liberal jurisdictions continue to not enforce our immigration policies and work with federal ICE. So.
Yeah, so we went down to Eagle Pass. We were able to observe the border on the Rio Grande through helicopter. Working with the Texas Department of Public Safety, we took some airboats. We checked out a surveillance plane to kind of see the work they're doing there. Just to kind of tie this together, I think what Leader Nesbitt was getting at is they come across the border with drugs, and some of them are criminals, right? They come across the border. And what we're seeing is that a lot of that activity is coming into our state. So whether it's this fentanyl that showed up really cheap, it seemed like overnight, that is all over Michigan. Well, that isn't, that's coming across the border. That fentanyl isn't something where the source materials are here in the U.S. I mean, it is coming across the border. You see the criminals, illegal aliens, committing these crimes that are coming across the border. And what I want people to understand, because we were down there, and we asked the people on the front lines, what are the major policies that led to this surge in illegal immigration across our border in 2021? And the biggest factor they told us was eliminating President Trump's Remain in Mexico policy. So I want everyone to understand what that means. So it used to be when they caught an illegal alien crossing the country or across the border, whether it was apprehending them at the border, whether it was, if they were drowning or something and they got medical attention and they brought them across to help them, they would remain in Mexico while they were going through the process of getting a hearing about whether they have a legal right to be in the United States. What changed under Biden is now, so even when they apprehend someone, so there's dozens of people crossing the border in Eagle Pass every day, and when they catch someone, unless, number one, they have to try to figure out who it is. Many of these people don't have documentation, and it's hard to figure out who they are. But if they can figure out who they really are, then they run a criminal background check. And unless they're a criminal, then they release them into the United States, okay, not into Mexico like they used to do. So then they can have a hearing in a day in court to explain, hey, I have a legitimate reason or need to be here, or hardship. They release them into the United States. And what the people on the front lines told us, and you guys can look this up, they're getting hearings 6 or 7 years from now. Some are getting hearings 10 years from now. So they're released into the United States under Biden's policies, and they don't get a hearing for 6 to 10 years, okay? So they're here in the United States for that period of time. Now, what we were told is that the Biden ICE says to them, please call us and tell us once you've reached your final destination so we know where you are. Well, only 3% of these people are doing that, and those are probably not the smart ones, but at least they're honest. But that's 3%. So the other 97% disappear after they're caught at the border and then released into the United States with a court date that could be 10 years from now. a lot of the conversations we're having in Michigan is about what happens after that, okay? Now, what I've been trying to explain is that during that 6 or 10 years, they claim asylum. They claim asylum status, okay? When that happens, they become eligible for these programs that Governor Whitmer is dangling out there to try to but really, it's an incentive to attract them to Michigan. So whether it's the newcomer rental subsidy, which would give, and it's a brand new program that started last year and it's just ramping up. And we sounded the alarm on it, and thank goodness we did, because it's going to hopefully deter a lot of a lot of illegal aliens from receiving it. But right now, they're eligible. You come across the border, you're caught, you're apprehended, you're let go, you have a hearing in 10 years, you claim asylum status, and then Governor Whitmer will pay, her administration will give you $500 rent subsidy. And then we saw, and they're willing to help you fight to stay in the country in this budget proposal to give you $8 million to fight your deportation. If you were an illegal alien coming into the country, wouldn't you go to states like that where they're providing you benefits to help you stay in the country while you're fighting your deportation? Secondly, when you have sanctuary policies where they're not going to ask about your immigration status, or if you're apprehended, they're not going to cooperate with ICE to detain you until ICE shows up to do the deportation. And these are the people that don't show up to their hearings. So say you don't show up after the 6 years and they find you. Well, these sanctuary counties are not going to turn you over to ICE to show up to court, to force you to show up to court and begin the deportation hearings. So that's why these sanctuary counties and cities and places that give welfare to people that cross the border illegally are magnets for this kind of activity. I would say, one thing that became very clear to me when I was talking to the people there was what would it help if states like Michigan sent National Guard down here to the border? And the answer was yes. If you look at how long that border is, it's a long border. And what these units are doing down there is they're filling the void that President Biden has dropped the ball, and they're building the fencing. So they're building fencing across that border with razor wire to deter people from coming across. And by the way, there's only fencing on one side, the U.S. side. If you look on the other side, there's no fencing. There's nobody there patrolling or helping. Now, they told us under President Trump there was a lot more cooperation from Mexico, but now there's no cooperation. In fact, the drug cartels run basically the government over there on the border. So when you come across, they're building that up, and they're putting people and they're stationing them on the border, right? So they're there, they're patrolling. That is a deterrent, particularly for the drug cartels that are trying to come across. If you're a drug cartel, are you going to go and try to cross where there's a bunch of, Texas and Florida National Guard people? No. You're going to figure something else out. So the more National Guard that are down there on the border, the more area they can patrol. And I'll point out, the goal of this is just to push people to go into the ports of entry. It's dangerous crossing the Rio Grande. It's dangerous trying to climb through razor wire and all that stuff. But there are port of entries. They can go to those port of entries and they can follow the legal process. That's really what the goal of this is. And then they go through that process. They can be identified, they can claim refugee status, and they can go through proceedings to see, to determine their eligibility to come into the country. There's probably hundreds of thousands of refugees that are allowed into the country every year. It's probably more. I don't have the
We
statistic.
have 1 million legal immigrants come into the U.S.
And these are people from war-torn countries, they're people with financial need, all kinds of things, and there's criteria for that. So if you push people into the port of entries, then they can go through that process. But, something has to be done to deter all this crossing. It puts people's lives in danger. And the other thing we saw down there is a big part of these National Guard responsibilities are search and rescue. Every week there's somebody, that runs into a problem, a health emergency, trying to cross the border, and these National Guards are stepping up and saving their lives. So more work needs to be done down there, and I would say, it's something that I plan to bring forward in the budget process, is we need to have Michigan National Guard funded to join these efforts of these other 12 states on the border, to help protect our communities and also to save lives. I'll just make one more observation. So when we were down there, there was an area, it was interesting. So you've got, miles and miles and miles of the fencing on state land, and it's patrolled by these National Guards. And there was an area, it was, I don't know what, about a half mile long, it's federal land, no fence.
No barriers.
No barriers, nothing. That's the area that Biden controls, and his immigration, his homeland, or what would it be? The Border Patrol. And so, that is now the area they're crossing through, is the federal area. And you see, the Border Patrol arresting them, and we saw that when we were there. Because there's this half-mile area, they're all coming across through there. The challenge is once they enter across, they're apprehended, and then they're released, right? So the idea is you have to prevent them from going, or else they're here for 10 years. But I would just say, that was what the most clear contrast, and the reason why you need the states to step up, and why this is a state issue. That would be the whole area, if it weren't for these states stepping up, is like this area that's like a half mile the federal government controls with no fencing, where they're just coming across, and then they're apprehending them and releasing them unless they're hardened criminals. And I think if the people really understood that, they would be just shocked that that the federal government is not even really trying to prevent this illegal immigration. And it's millions of people that are pouring across into the country. The Senator King told us, for every 500 kids that come across, they have to build a new school in Texas, right? And they're getting millions of people. You see housing problems in Texas and Michigan and across the country. Where do you put them? We talked about the crime problems. So there are all kinds of public health problems, just housing problems, issues of public spending, welfare. How do you help millions of people coming across the border when really we don't even do a very good job of helping the ones that are here legally? If you look at Governor Whitmer's work here in the state, our schools, we're 47th, 7 out of 10 third graders or fourth graders can't read proficiently, 7 out of 10 are not proficient in math in 6th grade, and then they're proposing bringing millions of people into the country, and then just settling in states like Michigan through the Whitmer policies that attract them, and then you have a housing crisis, and then what do you do with all this? It just puts more and more strain on the system, which is why states like Texas and Florida and others are stepping up, and Michigan needs to join them. So I think we're happy to answer questions about this issue, and hopefully you have questions, because I'll tell you, when you go there, you see firsthand how serious it is.
So I would say I have two questions. The first one being, what is something you specifically saw that you think has just really changed you as a person and as a thinker on this topic?
But one of the areas is just being on the front line and seeing, the challenges that where we had in Eagle Pass and Palmer Park, they were having to process 3,000 to 4,000 plus a day in a small town like that. And that barriers do work, do prevent them coming across, but the main takeaway that I had coming out is one, President Biden could reinstate some of the Trump-era laws that were in place. The Remain in Mexico policy was one that they said would just stem the flow automatically. And then two, enforcing current laws on the books, such as if you cross into the country illegally, that you're not able to get any form of immigration status for 10 years. You got to return to the country of origin. And they could say those two areas right there would really stem the flow. Because right now, the last 3 years, they say people are selling their places, paying the cartels, coming up here because now's the chance because of these Biden border policies that are happening. And I'd add one other thing to build on is that because of that, states now have a responsibility and a role to protect our homeland, to protect our people, to protect the citizens. And you see Texas really stepping up. They said it's at least $2 billion a year, sometimes up to $3 billion a year. It's coming out of the Texas state budget that could be going to education, roads, other things. But instead, you're having the problem on the borders. Also, when you're there, it's like the front line. So what we kept hearing is that what was coming down from Washington to the Border Patrol is just process them, get them through, and there's really no big background checks that's happening. That's a morale issue. And so what Texas, along with the other states that have sent folks, is trying to, how do you build up the barriers to, just try to stem the flow as best as possible. But the amount of expense on the state budget in Texas is just enormous, unbelievable.
I know you said you were invited by a state senator, but who paid for your travel expenses for this trip?
The Department of Public Safety in Texas, when we got to Austin, so we paid for our flight down to Austin, and then when we got to Austin, the Texas Department of Public Safety hosted us.
Yeah, and you had delegations from multiple states, so
But part of
many
it,
of which have their National Guards there on the border, and, honestly, we should join them. We should be one of those states.
So are you, excuse me, are you
And,
calling for something specifically then, such as greater increased funding for the National Guard budget in order to do something like this? I guess, are there tangible solutions that you're asking the legislature to bring forward?
yeah, we need to put money in the budget for this year to send National Guard down to the border. We need to stop funding programs such as what you see for housing subsidies and legal subsidies for illegal aliens. And we need to pass the legislation that we've introduced, and we've called on both Senate and House leaders to bring up our ban on sanctuary jurisdictions, increase penalties on fentanyl in the state, and then calling the Biden administration to end their disastrous border policies. So that's what I'm calling for.
Yeah, and you'll see House Republicans introduce some legislation very soon dealing with the fentanyl issue and increasing penalties on the manufacture and distribution of fentanyl. You'll also see, heightened penalties for illegal aliens who commit crimes in Michigan. I'm interested in pursuing something like you see in Texas, Senate Bill 4, where you actually make it a criminal offense to be in the country illegally. So that's something that law enforcement can use. They can look and say, that's you can arrest them for being in the state illegally, and that's one of the things that states can use to begin deportation hearings. Because you look, I think it's just such a farce that you can be here illegally and you cross the border, you're here illegally, and they don't even ask about your status, and they won't even arrest you for that. That's not a crime. You can just be here illegally. I think we should be enforcing the laws. We should be, if you come illegally, you should be deported. I think most people agree with that. If you're here illegally, that should be against the law, and you should be deported. And so giving states more tools to do that, I think, is important. You see that in Texas. Iowa passed that. They're going through some legal process and court hearings and things, and, that's normal, right? There's always tension between the federal government and states. That's how our system was designed. That's what federalism is. But states have to assert under federalism their power. And if and this, in my judgment, is a power granted to the states. And so the courts will sort it out. But I think when it gets done, the U.S. Supreme Court is going to side with states that are enforcing immigration laws. And you look at these crazy lawsuits that the Biden administration enters into, where they're trying to force them to rip down fencing that they're putting up to defend their border. They're trying to stop them from enforcing state laws to arrest illegal aliens that are caught. That's craziness. So, to answer Samantha's question, I just think, like, you hear this on TV, but when you go down to the border, it's not a political issue. I mean, we talk to, dozens of men and women that are there on the border every day. And you ask them the questions because you hear it on TV and it sounds crazy, and it's all true. I mean, when they say Venezuela emptied their prisons and sent people across the border, what they said to us was, we thought that was crazy too. And then we saw them show up
Months later, yeah.
on the border,
Yeah.
these prisoners from criminal gangs in Venezuela, and we had to deal with them on the front lines. This is a real thing. And then when you start hearing, these aren't Mexicans, right? There's a lot of Guatemalans, there's a lot of people from other Central American countries, but you're seeing, and you ask a question and they say, I tell you this is true. Men that are in their 20s coming across from China and Russia, and thousands of them, and they're like, they're all military age, and you say, how is that? And they say, we don't know what they're doing. But these are the people that China and Russia are sending here. And you start saying, if you start getting thousands of these Chinese and Russian nationals coming into the country illegally, all of males of military age, what are they doing here? Are some of them being sent by these foreign hostile governments to infiltrate us from within? I mean, this isn't what it used to be in the 80s and 90s. This is becoming a real serious crisis that's going to have a lot of implications. And so when you're down there and the federal government is not doing anything about this, it is impossible. It is so hard to understand or fathom how dumb the federal policies are. And why wouldn't every politician, whether you're Republican or Democrat, support our national security and protecting our borders? That is just so mind-blowing when you're there to see that firsthand and to realize that's real.
I mean, this is the graph from the last 25 years shared with us on illegal alien apprehensions, and just look at the last 3 years. I mean, this is just astounding, the multiplication, whether it was the Obama administration or the Bush administration, the Trump administration really put it down, but under the Biden administration, it's just been a full open border and a free-for-all. And this is the effect that, whether it's the economy, whether it's drugs and crime and safety, that we need to be on the front line protecting our citizens here in the state.
And what's so scary about this fentanyl crisis is, these aren't junkies. These aren't people that that are hardened drug users who've lost their life. I mean, that they're like, this has been a downward spiral for many years, and then they finally overdose. We were hearing stories. I mean, these are like young people that think they're getting an Adderall pill from a friend, and then it's something that was bought on the black market, and it has a lethal dose of fentanyl in it, and like that, they're killed. And that's happening not just in Texas and Michigan, all over the country. And, any pill that somebody takes, they'll make it look like that, and they'll put fentanyl in it, and because of the way they mix these, it could have a lethal dose or it could have none. They told us they're just mixing these things in a Ninja blender that they got from Walmart. And then people say, well, why are these pills have lethal doses in it? That's why.
Well, thank you. Thanks for coming out. And so appreciate it. If there's any follow-up, let us know. So I got to hit another event. So appreciate it.
Thanks, everybody.